Did you have any background in traditional media like terrestrial radio before you started the Sick and Wrong podcast?
Yeah, that's what I went to school for. I got a degree in broadcast communications at the University of Michigan. This is like end of the 90s. And then I worked radio in Chicago. Well, I did radio in Detroit for a bit, like interning. I worked radio in Chicago. And then I moved to San Francisco, where I was also doing radio. But I could never get like a well-paying gig. It was usually just kind of like, fill in here. Here's a metal show. And back then, my DJ name was Dirty Sanchez.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Which is funny because no one knew what it meant in like 1999. It was kind of like, it wasn't that well known of a term. So it was funny because stations would be like, all right, Dirty Sanchez up next. And I also did it was KUSF 90.3 FM was a local station that had been around in San Francisco for years, for decades. And I got hooked up or introduced to this guy named Ron Quintana, who had been doing this heavy metal radio show since 1981. He actually was really good friends with Metallica and gave them their name. And Metallica used to come on the show. So a really storied metal show called Rampage Radio. And so I started doing that for about 4 or 5 years. I actually did that with Wackerly. And that one was an unpaid gig, but we made money just kind of DJing out and things like that. And then I was trying really hard to get in terrestrial radio, but I could never really get a paying gig, like a well-paying gig. So then, I think it was like 2006, I decided to. It was because of Ricky Gervais, actually. Ricky Gervais did a podcast back then, and I remember thinking, like, I could do this myself. I got all the equipment. Why do I have to go to a radio station? And so then I started recording it with Wackerly, and it was basically the same thing we did on Rampage Radio, just take out the metal music and just do stories.
And when it came to the radio show, was there ever a kind of Sick and Wrong type sensibility to it? Did you ever bring that kind of subject matter or sensibility to the show, like between songs?
Oh yeah, Rampage Radio. That's pretty much why Sick and Wrong was pretty. Was an easy transition because on Rampage, what we do in between songs, we'd read really Sick and Wrong stories. Like it's the exact same stories we do now, and so that's kind of I think where I honed my Sick and Wrong investigative skills. Like I would just find like one of the grossest stories you can imagine, and then Wackerly and I had other co-hosts as well. P-Town was another co-host who was on that show. We would just read these stories and then play like metal songs. It was basically the same show, just minus subtract the music, with the music.
And at this point, how big is the Sick and Wrong audience? Like, what is the average number of downloads you get per episode?
Oh, back in 2006 when we first started?
Well, actually, like nowadays.
Nowadays. It's interesting because it fluctuated. I do think our heyday, I would say, with Sick and Wrong was probably around 2013 or 14. We used to get really big numbers. We were always like ranked really high in iTunes because we were one of the original ones, like one of the first podcasts. But then once the celebrities came in, like Mark Maron and Joe Rogan and all them, Sick and Wrong just kind of fell down the ranks because obviously they're celebrities. So back then we used to get like around 35,000 to 40,000 downloads a week. Now we're probably around like I'd say 18 to 20.
Wow, that's pretty good. And
it's decent for an indie podcast, but yeah, it's not like what it used to be.
And speaking of the celebrity guests, like, do you still have a dream interview subject that you'd like to have on the show, but they've eluded you so far?
I'm trying to think of some dream subjects. I would love to have Neil Hamburger on the show, actually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites, and I've tried to schedule him a few times. It's just never worked out. Another person who I think I'm actually trying to get on the show soon is Henry Rollins, actually. That's another guy that I'd love to get on the show. But, recently we did have another bucket list celebrity who I was trying for years to get on the show. I don't know if you listened to episode 666, but we had Damien Eccles from the Westminster.
Yeah, I listened to that one. That was a really good episode, yeah.
Yeah, that guy, God, I've been trying for a couple of years to get that guy in the show. I don't know why all of a sudden he was down to do it. One of my other favorite interviews was, what's that guy's name from Chris Hansen from To Catch a Predator. I don't know if you ever listened to that one, but he just recently got into trouble for writing bad checks.
Oh, so right, yeah.
Yeah, we had him on a few years ago. And then I think one of my favorite interviews over the years, kind of digressing from your original question here, but we actually got one of the first interviews of that guy, the guy who had sex with a dolphin. Remember that guy, the wet goddess?
Yeah, sounds vaguely familiar. Yeah, I think I heard about that.
Yeah, that dude, I had read about it, I forget where. Usually fans send me weird stories about it or something. And so I saw this and I was like, oh my God, I got to contact this guy. And he'd written a book about having a sexual relationship with a dolphin. And he came on, and then, like, I would say maybe 3 months after that, or 4 months after, he was on Howard Stern. So I was just like, we got him first.
Yeah, right. And you mentioned getting emails from your fans. Given the dark subject matter of the show, have you gotten some really strange emails from them? Like, aside from story ideas, have people ever just sent you weird messages or anything like that?
Oh, yeah, all the time. we get, I mean, most of them send in stories. Like, they'll send in stories and things like that. But it's the phone calls, mostly. We get some really weird phone calls. I don't know if you've heard about that guy who's kind of become a bit of a foil on the show, the Boner Villain. His name was Batman Villain, and then we changed it to Boner Villain. Oh, yeah. That guy calls in with some of the weirdest phone calls.
Yeah.
Like, he'll be sitting there saying, like, he'll say, can I suggest some methods on how I could kill you, Dee? And then he'll, like, they're cocking his, like, shotguns and stuff. Just a weird guy. Personally, I think he's a harmless incelibate, but whatever.
Yeah.
But we do have a lot of people like that. We still get a fair amount of girls sending naked pictures to Harrison a lot. That's kind of funny. We do get a lot of these, like, weird calls asking for advice, which are kind of crazy. And most of them we play on the show. It's very rare that we'd not play a call on the show.
And what are your other sources for weird news stories?
You know my favorite source now. I used to have a lot of them. I used to go to, like, the Mirror and the Daily Mail and Smoking Gun and Fark.com, F-A-R-K. I used to go to those, but now my primary source is Fox News Crime.
Really?
Because Fox News is such a joke. Fox News is the equivalent of the Daily Mail. It's tabloid journalism at its finest. I don't even think they report facts. I mean, I think they loosely get the facts straight, but it's mostly sensationalistic reporting. So if they can find a weird story about an immigrant or a weird story about, any kind of weird story, they're going to post it on their site. And so I think that's kind of because that just lends credence to the type of reporting that terrible station does. But Fox News Crime gets a lot of great stories. They report on everything. I don't know why. So that's kind of become my go-to source. I also go to, people.com crime and Oxygen crime. Oxygen.com crime has a lot of good sources too. But these days, most of the stories are sent in by listeners. So I don't really have to hunt as much anymore. I usually go to Fox News, but if a listener sends something in, I'd rather give them credit and mention their name and read their story.
And I've found any Florida-based news outlet usually is a source of weird news as well.
Oh my God, yeah, Florida. There's one called, like, the Daily Six in Florida. Florida's probably the best place to get crime news because I guess there's some, like, state law or something that they can't make news confidential. They have to release it all to the media. Whereas a lot of, like, California and I know some other states here, depends on, like, the age of the crime, of the perpetrator and things like that. They tend to keep a lot of these stories under wraps. But investigative journalists in Florida can get any crime, any story. So you get a lot of these really weird crimes coming out of that really weird state.
Yeah, like the guy who owns a machete that he named Kindness and told his neighbors going to kill them with kindness.
And then killed a couple people with kindness, yeah.
Yeah. Do you have an episode of the show that you're most proud of that you would consider to be a highlight above all the others?
You know, one of my favorite shows is, I think, when we used to do this a lot more. It was like, God, I would have to say it's probably maybe 2008 or 2009. We did an April Fool's Day show where we decided that, you know, the sick and wrong content is repellent to a lot of listeners. So we decided to change it to soft and warm. And so instead of sick and wrong, it's soft and warm. And then we're doing like these feel-good stories. I think I did a story about that really tall Chinese basketball player, Yao Ming. He had like reached down and was into these dolphins that were choking and was pulling out like plastic that the dolphins had swallowed in the ocean. And he was just sticking his long arms in their mouths and saving all these dolphins. And that was my story. And I forget, Wackerly did a story about some kind act or something. And our listener audience flipped their collective minds. Like, they're just like, what? I'm never listening to you guys again. And they were so upset that we were going to do this soft and warm thing. And it was just a joke.
Yeah.
But it was you know, there's a lot of standout episodes over the year. You know, I missed the episode where with Bob Madigan. So I don't know if you remember, if you listened to some of those, but he was a good dear friend of mine, and he died. He died a few years back. But we had an episode where we actually, after he died, we had a medium contact him.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Over the air, yeah. So we've done some pretty cool stuff. You know, I try to like. You know, we try to like sort of push the envelope when it comes to the radio. Sometimes it's funny. It's like one of my favorite episodes. Maybe no one even really notices. You know, actually, this episode 666 with Damien Eccles was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
that was a good one.
It was fascinating.
And I also look forward to the holiday shows with like Wackerly comes back on now, and you know, me and Harrison usually do one with Wackerly and Steele, my brother.
And what podcast do you listen to, and why?
You know, to be honest, it's pretty bad. I don't really listen to many podcasts. I listen to news podcasts.
Uh-huh.
I occasionally will listen to Rogan, but I find Rogan kind of boring. Depends on the guest.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, sometimes it's just like this long rambling thing. You know who had a good one is what's his name? Jim Norton's podcast.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Jim Norton had one that actually I think he still does it. Let's see here. Yeah, Jim Norton and Sam Roberts did a pretty good one that I listened to for a while. Yeah, beyond that, I don't really listen to too many podcasts. I used to listen to podcasts a bit more. I mean, I like news. I listen to a lot of news. Yeah. Like news radio and news podcasts. So, you know, like CBS, ABC, things like that. But in terms of like comedy podcasts, I don't really listen to too many.
Mm-hmm. And on the
Harrison listens to a lot of podcasts. I think it's also kind of like I used to have a longer commute, now I don't. So, and that's I've noticed a lot of people, especially like if you're sitting at your desk graphic designing, it's a great time to listen to podcasts, or when you're doing work like that. Nowadays with my work, I'm kind of running around all the time, so I don't really have. Yeah, it's not very podcast friendly, I guess.
Yeah, you do need the time to devote to it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So in the future of the medium itself, it's slowly becoming mainstream. Like you had a situation like Milo Yiannopoulos seeing his career being obliterated because of a comment that he made on a podcast. Do you think it's going to get to the point where they become competitive with terrestrial radio and satellite radio and possibly even generating the same kind of revenue and exposure?
You know, honestly, I think we're already there. Celebrities like Mark Maron and Joe Rogan have like blown this and Adam Carolla actually have blown this medium to the point where it is competitive with terrestrial radio and satellite radio. You know, I'm surprised Howard Stern, who's been on Sirius. I know Howard Stern hates podcasts. I listen to the Howard Stern show, by the way. Yeah, I like Howard Stern a lot. Even though I pirate it. Yeah. But I do like the guy. Howard Stern, I would say, he's always been an inspiration to me. Even as a kid.
Me too,
in terms of radio, I've listened to Howard Stern since I've been, well, I don't know, like probably 11. He was it was Howard Stern and this Oliver Stone movie called Talk Radio. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yeah,
with Eric. Yeah, that's what those two movies. I remember I saw that as a kid when I was really young, and I'm surprised my parents let me watch that. And I was like, oh my god, I want to do this. I was like, I want to do this. And then I listened to Howard Stern. I'm like, this guy's great. And you know, Howard Stern still is one of the funniest, most creative people in radio. Like, my sister's a huge Howard Stern fan, and I was at their house like a month ago, and we were watching some. She watches, like, she's a serious member. She watches the show they listen to it and watch it. And we were watching it, and it was like a roast of Ronnie the Limo Driver, and it was some of the funniest stuff I've seen in a long time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Howard Stern's still consistently amazing.
Oh, I think so too. Yeah.
But yeah, like, I don't know why Howard Stern would be tethered to Sirius when he could just start his own Howard Stern podcast channel like Adam Carolla did,
or even just upload episodes of the satellite radio show and put them out as podcasts.
I wonder if he could do. I don't know if he could do that contractually, but maybe. Yeah. But if he started his own Howard Stern network or whatever and had a bunch of people on, that guy would make probably as much money, if not more, because he owns the content that he does to Sirius.
Yeah,
I know he hates the medium of podcasting. What I like about it is, yeah, if you're a celebrity and you have that type of following, sure, I think you could. You're first of all, it's unbridled. You know, it's not censored. Second, you can put out whatever content you have. You're not beholden to advertisers, but yet you can still get, if you get the downloads, you can still get advertising on your show. I mean, sure. I know we have Adam and Eve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Patreon actually is a relatively new medium for people to make some money, and that actually kind of definitely changed my attitude towards podcasting. I kind of wish Patreon was around when Wackerly was still doing the show, because Wackerly, that was the one thing with Wackerly, he it's all about, we're not making any money, and I think that was a big reason why he left.
Oh yeah.
But at the same time, Wackerly, he was one of the worst people to have to work with. Yeah. He was so difficult. Whereas Harrison also can be difficult in other ways. Harrison's kind of not as reliable as Wackerly. But Harrison loves doing radio, and that's the thing. He did radio in New York, kind of the same path as I have, that I've done. And so Harrison's, he'll come in and we'll do the podcast and the Patreon stuff for like 6 hours, recorded all straight through. And Wackerly would never do that.
Oh, yeah. It's another great radio movie, by the way, is Pump Up the Volume with Christian Slater. Did you see that one?
That's an awesome movie. It's another one of my favorites. Yeah. We've been referencing that recently because a caller calls in from Miami and he sounds just like Christian Slater.
Oh, yeah, really?
It's a recent episodes. This guy called in and was telling us a story about how he got wasted and drove his car into a river and didn't get a DUI, which is insane. But anyway, he sounds just like Christian Slater.
Who's your favorite serial killer and why?
Let's see. Who is my favorite serial killer? I've always been fond of Ed Gein. Mm-hmm. I've always been fond of Ed Gein because it's just such a horrific story. And it's been such an inspiration to so many movies. You had like Silence of the Lambs, you have Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But truly just a house of horror. I mean, it's Psycho. Psycho is based on Ed Gein too.
Yeah.
You really hear stories that are, or serial killer crimes that are at that level. I mean, there are more prolific serial killers. I mean, Ted Bundy killed more people than Ed Gein. Jeffrey Dahmer killed more people. Jeffrey Dahmer is probably my close second. Because Dahmer, God, that entire story with Dahmer is insane. But Dahmer and Ed Gein are both from Wisconsin.
Yeah.
What's interesting about Ed, we actually have never done an intro on Ed Gein on the show. That was one thing I always wanted to do, was kind of focus on serial killers, but Wackerly thought that was boring, and we never really did that. And then Harrison doesn't want to do it now because there's all those million other true crime podcasts out there now that do it, Last Podcast on the Left and all that. And they've done a 3-episode thing on Ed Gein. So we usually go the even more obscure serial killers, like Joe Ball, the Alligator Man. We did that recently. But Ed Gein is a fascinating guy. This guy, was much like Anthony Perkins in Psycho. His mother just completely controlled him. His mother made him dress like a woman. His mother, even at the end when she was dying, he still slept next to her corpse. And I think that's all part of it that made his twisted psyche. And then, then he started like kidnapping women and making furniture out of their skin. Just a crazy man.
Yeah.
It just inspired like Texas Chainsaw and all that. So Ed Gein definitely is probably one of my. I'm fascinated by that guy. But yeah, there's many serial killers. Dahmer. The thing is with Dahmer that always blew my mind is that guy was just living in a one-bedroom apartment right next to other people. And meanwhile, he's got like, people's brains in jars. He's got like, teenage boys coming into his house and never leaving. Like, I would like to think that if I was, my neighbor was doing something like that, I would be cognizant of it. I'd be aware of it. But you never know.
Wasn't it true that when the cops came to his door, he was in the middle of frying a bicep or something like that?
Yeah, when he actually got arrested. The craziest part about that is he like somehow got like a Filipino, like a 16-year-old Filipino kid or something. I think he's Filipino. Anyway, this kid came to his apartment and he drugged him and was doing his whole thing. He was ready to kill him, and the kid escaped and was like walking down the street naked. He went up to like these two prostitutes and was just like, how I don't think he could speak because he was so drugged up. And then the cops came and Dahmer like ran out and was like, oh, my boyfriend, we're in a fight. And the cops are like, oh, okay, we'll take him back to your house, and just took the kid back to Dahmer's house. And it was like, all right, well, nothing, thanks for taking care of him. And then they left. And then Dahmer like chopped him up and ate him or whatever.
Yeah, the cops in Wisconsin are very bright, apparently. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, Ed Gein had been doing it for years. So, yeah, it's pretty...
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to do this, Dee. I really appreciate it, and I love the show. And have yourself a great weekend.
All right, well, thanks a lot, and thanks for listening, too.
Yeah, all right, take care, man.
Get sick, give it wrong. All right,
thank you. Bye-bye. And that was Dee Simon of the Sick and Wrong podcast.